When I was partway through year 9, my dad pulled me out of school for homeschooling, and it was a nightmare. Homeschooling is, in essence, a completely unregulated means for controlling often mentally unstable parents to completely isolate their children from the outside world. And indeed, at that time, my dad's mental health had completely spiraled out of control. He was fully convinced that he was being followed by the government because of his anti-vaccine beliefs, I guess, and his reasoning for removing me from public schooling had nothing to do with education. He just didn't want me getting any more brainwashed by the global homo agenda than I already was. So what was homeschooling like for me? Well, I can tell you right now I was taught nothing. Genuinely, not even an attempt at putting together something like a curriculum was made. My schooling consisted of occasionally being given anti-vaccine videos to watch, conspiracy videos, 9/11 was an inside job, aliens built the pyramids, biblical literist videos, guys wandering around open fields looking for remnants of Noah's Ark type shit. But honestly, he barely even bothered to do that. I pretty much spent maybe 2.5 years just hiding in my room, playing Sonic games on Steam, and being a victim of child abuse. So obviously, it wasn't a great way to live. Like I said, my dad was unstable, he was violent, the slightest thing could set him off. I became considerably more awkward and socially anxious than I already was, and I had problems at school, sure, but I know for a fact I would have been better off there than being at home all the time. So how does this happen? How was this allowed to happen? Is there nobody who comes to check in on homeschooled kids? Well, twice during this ordeal, somebody from the Department of Education came to check in on us. It was the same man both times. First time he came, he asked to see what kind of curriculum we were working through, to which my dad couldn't really give an answer. He asked to see some worksheets, something I'd written, just anything, and we could provide nothing because we had done nothing, and he barely seemed concerned by this. He said, well, no worries, nobody gets it all figured out within the first couple months, and he left. Which, how do you, as somebody whose job is to make sure that homeschooled kids are being schooled, just takes no issue with it obviously being clear that this kid is not being schooled? He came back a few months later, and by that point, my dad's mental health had completely disintegrated, Before that, he knew that he needed to pretend to be normal in front of certain people, but by that point, he had just completely lost any sense of self-awareness. So the entire meeting was my dad rambling on and on about how Wi-Fi causes cancer, they're putting chemicals in the water to turn the freaking frogs gay, and any attempts at steering the conversation back on track to my schooling were swiftly thwarted by more schizo-babble. Eventually, this guy tried to ask me how things were going, and my dad would not allow me to speak. At one point, he literally put his hand over my mouth to stop me from speaking. I looked at the guy while this was happening, and he was visibly uncomfortable. He was desperately trying to avoid eye contact with me or anything that might force him to acknowledge what was happening in front of him. Once again, an entire meeting goes by in which we are unable to materialize any kind of evidence that schoolwork is taking place. The man leaves, he's politely nodding as my dad is recommending him a list of conspiracy YouTubers and Alex Jones clips to watch, and that was it. After that, my dad's mental health only got worse and worse. I had lost the freedom to leave the house without him because he was certain that the government agents following him might kidnap me. I was certainly not allowed to take any public transport because terrorists might bomb it, and eventually I started being accused of being a government clone that had replaced his real child. On some days during all of that, I really did fear for my life. For a month or so, though, I just waited. I was so sure that after that last disaster interview, my dad had been flagged as needing some kind of investigation, some kind of review. But here's the thing, that guy never came back. Nobody from the Department of Education, nothing, no one. About a year and a half after that had passed, and nobody ever came back to check in on us. So when I reflect on this period in my life, I'm barely even mad at my dad. I am mad at that guy though. Listen, guy, if you're out there, fuck you. Fuck your whole life. You're a complicit little worm, and if there is a hell, that's where you're going. Anyways, my story isn't that unique. There are tons of kids out there that are in similar situations, and ultimately I count myself pretty damn lucky that it was only for a few years. If I had lived that way my entire school life, it would be a very different story. And that is the reality for a lot of kids, and nobody is coming to save them. So you can probably guess that I have a pretty low opinion of homeschooling. It is just something that I wanted to draw attention to because the complete lack of intervention in that situation that obviously needed intervention still baffles me to this day. I don't know why nobody ever came to check in on us. I guess we just slipped through the cracks. But while I've got you here, I do want to talk a little bit about what it's like being close to somebody who has fallen into the conspiracy whirlpool. There are a ton of great videos by people I respect who have explored conspiratorial thinking and some of the rabbit holes that they fall into, and I would say that in general, this topic is widely discussed online at the moment. There are entire communities of people who have had their loved ones fall for this conspiratorial brain disease, and they share their stories and they talk about what they should do. Something that does bug me with these discussions, though, is when all of the blame is pushed onto so-called grifters, right? A lot of conspiratorial thinking overlaps with conservative thinking, and people like to point at these extremist conservatives and say they're just in it for the money. They don't even really believe what they're saying. And I think that this is a comforting lie that we tell ourselves. It is scary, you know, people fall for these crazy ideas that are often fueled by pure hatred and ignorance, especially when you see somebody that you love falling for it. You want to believe that they are a victim of this, they've been brainwashed. But it's just not that simple. People don't get sucked into the conspiracy pipeline on pure accident. The so-called victims of this mindset tend to already be carrying all kinds of underlying issues that lead to it happening. And I can't speak for every individual case, but I can talk a little bit about my dad. My dad had always struggled with drug use. He had always struggled to succeed in life. He failed his university course. He struggled to keep down jobs. And these are all things that I can relate to in my own adult life. I think the main difference between me and my dad is that my dad felt very emasculated and humiliated by these failures. He was looked down on by people in the family as his drug problems got worse and worse, and he kept failing me as a parent. He could see that he was losing my respect as well, and I think it is often a sense of shame and humiliation that leads people to look for something or someone to blame for why everything is going wrong. People who fall into the conspiracy pipeline are often feeling cornered, hopeless, despised, and when you spend so much time in these extreme states of agitation, you suddenly become very open to ideas like, well, of course you're struggling to succeed in this world that the Jews have designed to torment you. Of course your family hates you. Their fucking pineal glands are calcified by all the chemicals in the water. I see so many people online saying, how can I save my loved one? What do I do? And the reality is, if they're already in this shit, you may as well consider them dead. And if your parent or guardian is in this shit, you need to do everything in your power to get away from them. I would say the only place to start is catching warning signs before it begins. If somebody that you know is feeling rejected, isolated, overly agitated, and you would hate to see them fall for this crap, reach out to them while you still can, because the reality is that once they step 1 foot into the whirlpool, it's already too late.